He had about 5 years in the wilderness. Ended up in Kelowna, and then in Victoria.
Ready. Okay. So, taught me, when you moved in there, what was it like working in that space with people there that were already in part of the...
It was okay. I mean, we were on a shoestring, and obviously you want to control your own space. I mean, there were the obvious problems, like we had to do our set building in the evening because the saws and the hammers were coming up through the floorboards, and people were working, they had office jobs. There were some people at the Arts Board who weren't quite sure that whether the Arts Board had done the right thing. I remember having a conversation with one woman who was a staffer there who said, well, at a certain point the Arts Board's going to have to decide, whether we want to support what you do or theater. And we'd say, well, we're not doing theater. But it was, it was a battle in that sense that, like in most of Canada, theatre was a building with a proscenium arch and a set behind it, and actors, there's this wonderful description of what proscenium theatre is. And I can't remember where it comes from, but it's sort of like you got the actors in one room, and you got the audience in another room, and you got no wall. Now the actors in the one room are pretending the audience isn't there, and the audience in the other room is looking through the hole in the wall, pretending that the people don't know that they're sitting there. And that to me is what proscenium theatre is all about. And when you take the actors and put them in the same room as the audience, you have a totally different experience. So that, that was the dichotomy, and that was the battle as to whether it was going to be a theatre that looked like every other theatre in the country, or whether it was going to be a theatre that was unique to Saskatchewan. And I remember when we did our first adult show, which I think was 68 or 69, which was The Good Woman of Saskatchewan. We would put these chairs around in a circle. And we could only put 400 or 500, I think maybe 300 people that had any kind of sightline, because again we had no risers. And people were blown away because they'd always sat looking in one direction, and suddenly, part of the show was not just the show, but part of the show was seeing that person across the way laugh, or frown, or do something. And a lot of people said to me early on that they were really disconcerted. I mean, they liked the experience, but they weren't sure why they liked the experience. And then years later, they would leave town for one reason or another, go to Calgary or Edmonton or Winnipeg and go to a show, and they say, it's not the same. It's not the same. I can't see the actors' faces. I can't see their eyes. I feel so removed from them. And a lot of them just wouldn't go to the theater anymore. And because the kind of experience that we gave them, that we wanted to give them, was so intimate and so up in your face, that kind of putting 600 people in a house and ignoring them as actors, wasn't a good experience for them. And but it was a battle. I mean, there's no question that it was a battle, because again, people had not had the experience of the other, and that was, it was like, try it. Just try it. If you don't like it, we'll do something else. And in the end, they liked it.
Was it a big decision also to do adult theater, do adult performances in '68? Or was it just inevitable?
It was fairly inevitable. From the very beginning, we would have teachers. Like, you see, what would happen is we'd come, and the kids go home and start bibbling at home about this wonderful thing that had happened. So the next year we would come back, and the principal would say, do you think you could do something for adults? Because, as I say, there was nothing. There was, particularly outside of Regina, Saskatchewan, there was absolutely nothing, except for the high school stuff, which was high school stuff. So we didn't have the money, we didn't have the time. So what we would offer is, I think it was in the second year, maybe even in the third year, what we would offer would be to do the high school show, like Hamlet or Macbeth, scenes of, for the adults. And because their kids had liked it, because they knew it was something interesting, Shakespeare didn't get in the way. So you actually found people getting off on Macbeth, getting off on Hamlet. I mean, that barrier of this is good for you or this is great writing or whatever was gone. And we even did the participation stuff, which I don't think I described the participation stuff with the high school kids, but it was a crowd scene. For example, second half of the program, we did the Julius Caesar, Friends, Romans, Countrymen. And we would rehearse the audience in the crowd reactions. We would get 4 volunteers to carry the body of Caesar in. One of the audience would be the body of Caesar. We had the other actors out there being Citizen 1, Citizen 2, Citizen 3 to sort of remind people of how the scene went. But man, it was exciting. Because as an actor playing Antony or the actor playing Brutus, you didn't quite know what you were going to get. And what you were doing was playing, a pre-rehearsed scene, but playing to an audience of extras who was only going to respond to what you were giving them. So we did that. And then the Saskatchewan Arts Board had every fall the Saskatchewan Festival of the Arts. And part of it was touring a play. Now, one year I think they actually brought the play in. Or no, wait a minute. Richard Savage was doing a theater. Actually, it was in the Round, up in Saskatoon in the Mendel Art Gallery, and he did it one year. And then I think Theatre Saskatchewan, which was Eric Salmon's theater at the University of Regina, did it one year. And they weren't very good, I didn't think. They weren't very successful, and the Arts Board was thinking of dropping the plays. So we said, give us a shot. Well, you're a children's theater. Give us a shot. So they said, okay, we'll give you a shot. So soon I went home, and we said, now, what can we do? Okay, we said, if we're ever only going to do one play for adults in our lives, what would it be? Well, we were both very hot on Bertolt Brecht. So we decided to do The Good Woman of Saskatchewan. And Brecht had a terrible reputation in Canada. So we did everything we could to, buy BB or whatever. I went out and found I think it's Paul Dessau wrote the music, and it ain't easy music at all. I went out and found that music, and that year, what we did was we did the school stuff, and then we came together. We had a couple of companies, and then we came together and did The Good Woman of Saskatchewan at night. And in the Round, my oldest child was 2 months old at that point. First touring baby in a long time, and I had a tiny part in the show. I directed the show, I ran the sound, and I kept Sarah quiet backstage because she was a colicky kid. What blew me away... Excuse me. Do you want some coffee? Now, was Totem the one that got closed down because they did...
No, that was Everyman.
That was Everyman, right. Yeah. No, there was Totem.
Lauren Arngren was the producer of, founder of Totem.
Yeah.
They got closed down because the venues they were in weren't safe.
Right.
But some good stories there.
And Everyman was Tobacco Road, the one where...
Dorothy Davies.
Yeah, where they decided to not have an intermission because they knew they were going to get arrested.
Well, Joy Coggill suspects to this day that it was a PR thing. That
oh, really?
that a couple of ladies were complaining about the first show and how terrible it was, and the manager or the PR guy decided to.
Oh, well, it could be. I mean, I heard all these stories when I was 15 years old. You know?
It's a big deal then.
And they were actor stories. So.
Okay.
When you were.
Okay.
I'll try. Sorry.
Yeah. So we were talking about So what blew me away about the Good Woman of Saskatchewan tour was that, first of all, people just took the play for what it was. I mean, Brecht was supposed to be a difficult playwright and difficult to do, and people just took it at its face value. Second of all, what that play is about is how hard it is to make money and stay a good person. Like, if you make money, you end up being a bad person. If you are a good person, you end up broke because you end up giving money to poor people. And farmers related to that. I don't know if people can remember back then, but there was the Lift program. I mean, there was all this stuff going on where you'd have a good crop, the price would drop. I mean, farmers were in really serious. Well, farmers are always in a really serious problem, but the whole mechanism of the grain business was stacked against the individual farmer, and the battle that they were fighting to maintain the family farm and to maintain a decent lifestyle for their family, and at the same time sell their product and they just took to that play. And what the other thing that blew me away was that the received wisdom was that you couldn't get more than 300 people to a play in Regina. And we had to extend, because we could only seat 300. We ended up with 6. I thought that was a fair basis to start a main stage company. And the other situation was, and it was a purely selfish one, was that we had a child, and only one of us could tour. Sue, being a nurturing person, did not want to leave her child behind. So it was at that point that we decided we had to take the chance and make the leap, and that happened in 1970. Because her first decision was to stay home for the first 5 years. And I mean, 2 weeks after the kid was born, she was working because she couldn't stand it. And so we you know, the success of The Good Woman, and I think we did 5 evenings the year after with Franny Highland, and then the festival kind of went away. So that would be 68, 69. So then we decided we would expand into a main stage company and take our chances. And we started off with a basic audience of 300 to 400, and it grew. It just grew.
So you had the festival was sort of how it began, and then.
Well, the festival was our first sort of. It enabled us to change our mandate, because the mandate was simply to do children's theater. And I mean, I think, you know, when we started, we never thought what children would do to the vagabond touring life, you know. And so suddenly you've got this child, and you know, you're not going to drag the kid all over the province for the rest of her life, and she's going to have to go to school sometime. So either we have to do something else or change what we do at the theater. And doing the 2 festival shows and feeling that kind of ripple in the community, you know, but I don't know, there's something about that time, you know, where you just said, I want to do this. So you went and did it, and there was a support system there, which was Canada Council Saskatchewan Arts Board. And I remember Gene Roberts, you know, saying, geez, you know, what kind of, you know, we can only give you so much money, you know, what kind of a chance you're taking, the weather and blizzards and cold. And I said, you know, I'm willing to take the chance, provided, you know, that we got some money there that enabled us to do something beyond doing the school tour. And one of the things that I knew about Regina that people from the East didn't know about Regina is that it is so unbearable.
Yeah.
Handling, because the company was always pretty egalitarian. We used to have a sign up in the green room. It was not an original sign, but it was, clean up after yourself. Your mother doesn't work here. I mean, it was that kind of a place. And well, it was partly, let's put it this way, it was partly that, like I say, what we were trying to do is run an ensemble. So when you bring in a star, it kind of shifts that. Now, that wasn't necessarily a bad thing, because Franny is a wonderful, wonderful person. But if we had moved in that direction, it would have changed the focus of the theater. And there weren't that many theatrical luminaries from Saskatchewan. Now, we did try and get John Vernon one year, because I really just admired John Vernon, but of course he had moved to LA and was making far, far too much money, to commit. But I think that was about it in terms of sort of people from, there were people in other media from Saskatchewan, Joni Mitchell and on and on. But in the theater, that was at that time, that was about it. And I think if there was the right part, I brought Joy Coghill in to do was it The Seagull? I think it was The Seagull. But that wasn't because she was a star. That was because she was my first teacher. She was a great friend of Brian's, and I was in town one day and went over to Joyce for dinner, and she said, "Wouldn't it be wonderful if we all worked together?" So we got on the telephone. We called. This was when Brian first came to direct for us, and we tracked down Brian at some university in the States, came up with a project, and just did it. But usually it was the companies that we had the stars were created in Regina. Actors who would start with a school tour and then work their way through the main stage company suddenly began to sell tickets. People would say, "Is Billy Vickers coming back? Is Lucy Peacock coming back? Is Mark Wilson coming back? Kyra Harper?" There were just actors that the audience kind of liked their work because they were always surprising, and it was that kind of a star system that it wasn't really a star system in that sense. We always used to list people alphabetically on the posters, but it was really exciting to watch an actor kind of take an audience and make that audience love them without trying to, just by the work that they were doing. But like I say, we did all we just did all kinds of things to see how they worked.
There's a quote here, I don't know if it's too philosophical or to even comment on, but by studying the Globe Theatre in some detail, it is hoped that several threads which weave through the fabric of theatre for the young in Canada, the participation play, the addition of an adult season, development of local themes and Indigenous authors can be focused. Is that the legacy, or is that?
I would hope so. Part of the problem is that times have changed, and I don't think they've changed to the better. But that period in our cultural history was one of real excitement and growth, and you felt that the government took it seriously, that art was an important part of the Canadian fabric, that the school system recognized that education was more than just the 3 R's, that it was a whole education of a whole person. And then from my point of view, a sense that the arts have to be rooted in a community. There was, over the years, there's been so much parachuting of people into places. Kristen Houghton parachuted into Calgary, and there was this kind of feeling of great art from the East coming west, and that really only in the East were the real practitioners of the art, kind of thing. And I, when I first got to England, being an Anglophile, I was the mecca of English-speaking theater, and I went to the theater one night and it was just dreadful. West End, professional actors, famous actors, and I suddenly realized that making art is not a matter of geography. Great art can happen where great artists are. And, so we always kind of fought that pull east. There really wasn't a pull west in those days. But that you could start something. It could take root in the community and go where it would go. That if doing X seemed appropriate, then you would do X, and that there would be support for that. Boy, do I sound like a wild-eyed optimist, but one actually believed in those days that the world was becoming a more civilized and humane place, and that there was a spiritual bottom line as well as an economic bottom line, and unfortunately there's now only an economic bottom line, and if it doesn't pay for itself, it ain't worth doing. And I'm sorry, I can't agree, but when you're overtaken by the Fraser Institute, and you're overtaken by all the garbage that's coming up from south of the border, and you're overtaken by this incredible masochism that this country has, that we don't deserve to have these things, we don't deserve a Medicare system somehow, we don't deserve to have the Canada Pension Plan, we don't deserve to have symphonies, we don't deserve to have art galleries, and you suddenly see it all crumbling before your eyes. Whereas, back in the 60s, it was our right to have an art gallery. It was our right to have a symphony. And you'd point over in Germany and say, a town the size of Regina, we'd also have an opera company. And it is our right to have the access to these things in the place where we live. And now you're saying, well, if you can't live in Cape Breton, move. So it's interesting, and I don't know how long people are going to put up with it, and eventually, hopefully, they will rise and say, we're damn mad, we're not going to take it anymore, and give us back all those good things. But yeah, that was what we were trying to do. We were trying to do nothing less than foment a revolution. A revolution in which the arts were a very permanent, needful part of people's lives. And for a few years there, it worked. For a few years there, we actually did it. For a few years there, I could actually sit down in front of a TV camera or in front of a newspaper reporter and say, we have Medicare in this province, we have Dentacare in this province, what about Solicare in terms of trying to get more money for the arts? You weren't laughed at. It was actually considered, and where the Globe, I think, for about a decade was pretty out front there in terms of speaking for the community. That the plays that we did reflected the community concerns and advanced those concerns, or there was one point just before we left when things were really bad, and the Divine Government was doing some pretty horrendous things in human terms to longtime civil servants. And I'm sitting in the car with Rex one day, and I said, Rex, I think we've got to do a play where we can say what everybody wants to say but is afraid to. At this point, I was, I figured it. If they killed my theater, well, fine. Why are we keeping our cards so close to the chest when disaster? And he wrote a play called Afternoon of the Big Game, which was a play about a guy who works in the government firing department. And a dialectic arose between the new right and the old left in the form of his father-in-law was an old CCFer, but the Grey Cup was being played in Toronto, and every time the new right made a point, the Argos got the ball, and every time the CCFer scored a point, Saskatchewan would pick up the ball and went, well, I'm telling you, the audience went nuts. the show would stop for 2-3 minutes at a time, because what was being reflected on that stage was what was going on in people's hearts, but nobody had the guts to say it. And occasionally you'd see people looking over across the audience, and they'd see somebody who, it got to the point where certain civil servants were told point blank they weren't to show up at the theater, or else they would face the chop. And it was that kind of force that I felt the theater could be, and still think it can be under the right circumstances. But now it's without having that sense that that being outrageous and taking a chance is rewarded instead of punished. Where right now in the theater in this country, you really have to be commercial. You can't afford to offend anybody. But I think the theater under the right circumstances can be a tremendously exciting place to be if those in charge have the guts to do it.
I wanted to ask you one thing. When you were establishing the Globe, there was also the Young People's Theatre in Toronto that was starting. Was there any kind of awareness of what they were doing?
I knew Susan, and we were kind of operating on different tracks at the time. What I found astonishing, once she discovered the Brian Way plays and started doing it, was that the Globe and Mail discovered the Brian Way plays and what she was doing with them, and the CBC discovered the Brian Way plays and what she was doing with them, and it was like the fact that we'd been doing them for 4 or 5 years. There was a theater out in Regina, so I always had a residual resentment about YPT because I don't know. After a while, one got really cynical about Canada as a place where things only I got noticed if they happened in Toronto. I got into a big fight with Carol Bolt, David Bolt worked for me for a long time. Carol wrote one of her first plays for us. When I was sitting in her apartment in Toronto, I said, Carol, the thing that really pisses me right off is the sense that if it doesn't happen in Toronto, it doesn't happen. She looked at me and said, but Ken, that's true. At which point, I didn't speak to her for a couple of years. I was so angry. But, the fact is that that's the way this country works. And there were a few years there where we thought we could change that. But it's come back to roost. So there was that, sort of thing going on. But, there was never any animosity. I love Susan, I love Jan, and Jan was, whenever he'd come out with the Canadian Opera Company or whatever, was so supportive and so friendly and so, just gung-ho about what we were doing that, so I was aware of what was happening, but and then she went in a completely different direction. For good or for ill, I don't know. For good or for ill, the Globe pretty much stuck to its philosophical guns. And people would say, well, why aren't you doing something different? And we would say, well, because what we do works, and the truth is the truth. And the 10 Commandments are the 10 Commandments. And, you don't add an 11th just because you've used the first 10. And as long as it works, let's keep doing it. And as long as we can develop what we're doing, let's keep doing it. But let's not just go after the next fashion that comes along in children's theaters. I think people consider that to be retrograde in a certain part of our community.
Did the Banff School of Fine Arts, was there much of a relationship between that and yourself?
No, none. No. No, none at all.
For talent there?
No, didn't look for talent there. Was never asked to teach there. They seemed to be very Alberta-centered in terms of their teaching staff at the time, anyway. And at that point, the Saskatchewan Arts Board ran the Saskatchewan Summer School of the Arts down at Fort Capel, and we were very much involved with that. Ran the drama course there for years until it folded, and that was our baby. Did some really interesting, exciting stuff down there. there was a string, I mean, it was a huge cross-section of stuff going on down there. There was a classical music program and a jazz program and pottery and creative writing and putting actors together with the music students and trying to get some kind of cross-fertilization happening. It was pretty interesting few years. And then, of course, as the school grew, it began to harden, and the writers didn't talk to the actors, and the actors didn't talk to the dancers, and then the bagpipers would come in, and
That's it.
That's it. Okay.
It's longer than I thought.
I could talk forever.